Hello, my name is Micheal Householder, class of '89. When I was a student at Brown, everyone, even many of my professors, knew me by my nickname, House. I was one of the founding members of Students on Financial Aid, or SOFA. Social class shaped my experience of Brown in several ways, both big and little. One of the more powerful instances happened on the first day of class, the first semester of my first year. Orientation had been a mostly pleasant experience for me, even though I was kind of an outsider coming from a small town in the Midwest. Most of the people I met were friendly enough, even if I could sense a kind of condescending amusement at my unfashionable clothing or lack of knowledge about the finer East Coast prep schools or better ski resorts. But those were subtle differences. Those subtle things, though, were thrown into sharper contrast on the morning of my first class. I had a work study job in the ratty and had been put on the dishwashing line, grabbing up dirty utensils and half filled milk glasses so that they could be placed into the appropriate trays for washing. The work was gross and boring. But I'd done hard jobs before, and in fact, during high school, my spring semester of high school, I worked an 8 hour swing shift at a local printing plant after school. But I wasn't quite prepared for what I was experiencing here as I, worked this dish line, and then I made my way hustling from the ratty over to Wilson Hall for my very first college class. And there weren't very many seats left available to me as I squeezed my way in looking for a seat. And as I sort of like shuffled by people, I could smell the drying milk and feel the orange juice and syrup on my clothing and in my hair, and I was sure that everybody else could see it and smell it too. And I thought to myself, how am I going to compete with these people that I spent my whole morning like serving and cleaning up after? Well, over time, I learned to use that feeling of alienation as a source of inspiration. So, what if some of my classmates had a sense of entitlement about this place? Nobody said life was fair. And the fact is, I had just as much right to a good education as anybody. But I came to realize that, I was sort of one of the lucky ones. At least I'd gotten in. And I became aware that there were others who, through no fault of their own, never even had the opportunity to come to Brown because Brown didn't have a need blind admissions policy. That is to say, an applicant who needed financial aid could be rejected in favor of another applicant whose family could pay full cost, even though the financial aid student might have had the stronger application. Well, I thought that this was really unfair. And, on the one hand, Brown represented itself as a bastion of high ideals, and I admired that. But in this way of need-aware admissions, it was operating as just another business and not a very ethical business at that, in my view. So this awareness came into even sharper focused when I was invited to attend a Board of Trustees subcommittee meeting. It must have been my junior or senior year. Well, the topic was whether they were going to raise tuition and fees for the next year and how much they should do that by. Well, there was a lot of talk about expenses and budgets, and one of the trustees made a proposal that we look at the list of our peer institutions and that we set the tuition price somewhere near the top of that list, but not exactly number one, more like three or four. And I'll never forget what he said. He says, after all, if you want people to think that you are selling a Mercedes, you have to price it like one. Well, I'm not a Mercedes kid. I'm a used Subaru kid. And I thought about what this way of looking at the world meant for someone like me. And I thought about all the other people that I knew who were like me. And so I stood up and my voice was kind of shaking, but I said, if you all raise tuition and fees by even $300 the next year, that meant that you'd have to find a way to provide financial aid of the equivalent of $300 for everybody like me. Otherwise, you were basically saying you're not welcome because I don't have that $300. And I know a lot of other students who don't have that $300. As I sat back down, I could see from the corner of my eye that there happened to be a faculty member there too, a beloved faculty member. who, stood up, sort of head nodding and gestured at me and said, I recommend that you really think about students who are in this situation. And there was no reply. It was sort of quiet for a minute, and I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. Maybe we change some minds here. Maybe justice is going to prevail. And then the question was called, and they voted to raise tuition and fees so we would be in line with the top five in price for our peer institutions. Sometimes I fantasize about having the kind of money that would allow me to be one of those trustees, but I don't. So mostly what I've done with my life is find ways to tip the scales now and then in favor of those against whom the system is mostly stacked. My first job after graduation was teaching high school in Central Falls, Rhode Island, once just down the road from Brown, and it's one of the poorest public school districts in the country. And teaching there, I met some amazing students who were absolutely smart enough to be at Brown, but who never would have considered applying because they didn't see themselves as even welcome there. So one of those students who I taught while I was there, Carol Guzman, later she did apply. She got into Brown. And even though I know that she's the one who earned her place through her own smarts and hard work, I like to think that maybe I had a little tiny role to play in that story because I encouraged her to believe that she had just as much right to a Brown education as anyone else. I can't say if things are any better or worse at Brown now. I suspect they're probably about the same. So long as Brown functions as a gateway into higher income brackets, at least for some students, there's going to be that mixture of feelings of gratitude for the opportunity, but alienation and a sense that they're not fully welcome there, that they're kind of an imposter in this place. Why I think SOFA was so important for me and for the rest of us who started that group was that it allowed us to see those feelings as an appropriate response to what we were experiencing. Our lack of money wasn't what was weird. What was weird was this concentration of wealth and power that made normal incomes seem, well, poor. So for any current student at Brown now trying to figure out how to hustle a little scholarship, or embarrassed by what their parents do for a living, or just pissed off by people who swing their money around like a baseball bat, I hope that they can find that same sense of community that we were able to make for ourselves. And then once they found it, I hope they can take that feeling through the Van Wickle gates, down College Hill, and out into the bigger world with them, wherever they may go.